It's the 13th of May 1940. German panzers amass at Sedan and start to cross the Meuse. In one decisive thrust, the Germans want to cut the Allies in two and usher in swift victory in their campaign against France. But to make it happen, the panzers need the Luftwaffe. Welcome to the Luftwaffe at War. Today I want to talk about that crossing of the Meuse and that race to the Channel in May 1940. Within a week, the German army breaks through the French defensive lines, it cuts the Allied lines in two and reaches Abbeville at the English Channel. And what is of course often considered a success based on the speed and the power of the German panzers was in fact something that was not possible without the Luftwaffe. So let's get into it. And quick reminder here, all my episodes come out in early access first for channel supporters or patrons, and patrons actually have a 15% discount for yearly support. If you like this content, consider supporting it for less than the price of a croissant each month. And talking of our episodes, my research, including all archive trips, are supported by patrons and channel members. Supporters get upcoming episodes early, can vote on topics, and have priority access to Q&As. And you can get all these bonuses too by signing up on patreon.com/milAvHistory or via YouTube memberships on Military Aviation History. Thanks to Thomas, Keith and OD who recently signed up. This video is sponsored by War Thunder. On the 10th of May 1940, Germany launched Fall Gelb, Case Yellow, the first stage for its assault on France. To take territory, vital air bases and draw the attention of the Allies, Heeresgruppe B marched into neutral Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg. Following their own plans to stop the German assault as early as possible, the French and British rushed to the aid of their new allies. The German plan seemed to work, but it had nearly gone completely wrong. Because the Germans had to keep to a tight schedule, in the Low Countries they had taken a massive gamble. Using paratroopers, the Luftwaffe secured the key bridges over the defenses at the Albert Canal in Belgium and at the Moerdijk and Rotterdam in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, the paratroopers had nearly met disaster, holding the bridges just long enough for the army to catch up. And at Den Haag, Germany lost about 70% of the dropped paratroopers in a failed attempt to take out the Dutch government. The success so far had come at the narrowest of margins for the Germans. Had there been any delay, the Luftwaffe would not have been able to concentrate its forces for the next stage. The one operation that was scheduled for the 13th and 14th of May, a decisive attack over the Meuse just north of the Maginot Line, where the French had not yet built the same level of static defenses as further south. Crossing the Ardennes, the panzers took 3 to 4 days to get into position. Now ready to strike, speed was vital. The panzers would have to cross on pontoon bridges, establish a bridgehead and maintain the momentum to drive deep into the Allied lines. And for this they needed the Luftwaffe both in the air and on the ground. As we look at the action around Sedan, it is important to recognize one thing. No, the French were not unaware of how vulnerable Sedan was, and yes, they had also considered that an attack at Sedan was possible. On the first point, the French had started to construct defenses around Sedan, but these were not yet at the same level as on the Maginot Line. And on the second point, the French had considered that due to the Belgian road improvements in the Ardennes, forces could now traverse this area with more ease than before. It is just that the French High Command assumed that any German operation would be a bit slower and that they would have enough time to bring in reinforcements. As historian James Coram tells us, open quote, French commanders estimated that they had 4 to 6 days to reinforce the Sedan area, while the Germans would have to bring up a large amount of artillery and ammunition to support any river crossing. End quote. But the Germans had brought artillery and ammunition a bit faster than that. And more importantly, they had brought pioneers, panzers and the Luftwaffe. And with those forces, they could attack immediately. The forces of Heeresgruppe A were under the overall command of Generaloberst Gerdrup von Rundstedt. At and around Sedan, this included 5 panzer divisions and 3 motorized infantry divisions. In short, a highly mobile force specifically set up to break into the Allied lines and then drive deep into the operational hinterland. This Panzergruppe was under the command of General Paul von Kleist and included Generalleutnants Georg Hans Reinhardt's 41st Army Corps moving into a position northwest of Sedan, with the 6th and 8th Panzer Division and the 2nd Motorized Infantry Division. As the main thrust, General Heinz Guderian commanded the 19th Panzer Corps, which included the 1st, 2nd and 10th Panzers, and the Motorized Infantry Regiment Großdeutschland. The 14th Army Corps supported with the 13th and 29th Infantry Divisions. On the French side, the forces were far more modest. The forward defense line included smaller blockhouses manned by the 147th Fortress Regiment. About a mile behind, the main defense line had a belt of bunkers and fortifications, manned by the 55th Infantry Division. Neither of these units were considered top-line formation, but the constructed and natural defenses of the river and expanding ridgeline could compensate for that. Crucially, the French had about 174 artillery pieces in the sector, and the guns of the 10th and 41st Corps could also be called in for support. All in all, Sedan was not the most heavily guarded piece of real estate in France, but it was also not defenseless. Given the amount of guns and defenses, the French High Command considered that the assigned units could delay any assault for long enough for reinforcements to come in. And as we will see, they weren't that wrong either. But the Germans had made their own preparations. Critical to this was the Luftwaffe, and its support came in 3 parts. First off, reconnaissance. With most areas in the Low Countries and France, German aerial photography had carefully catalogued and marked defenses, positions, and also the ongoing maneuvers of the French army in the field. It is because of this that the Germans knew where the French bunkers were, what areas the artillery was positioned at, and how any reinforcements could be brought in. And that would help them massively. The second thing the Luftwaffe brought was aerial firepower that coordinated its actions with the German army. Now I need to remind us all to hold our horses here. As you know from my previous episode on the Luftwaffe's doctrine, the Luftwaffe had not started the war with any particular wish or planning to conduct close air support. That came much later. But what it did want to do was concentrate forces and support the army in decisive operations by sealing off the battlefield from the air and hitting defensive lines as part of preparatory bombardment, so these were pre-planned attacks, while then going over to dynamic targeting on artillery positions, assembly areas, infrastructure, command posts and so on. This was meant to weaken the enemy and erode their cohesion, as well as rob them of the ability to maneuver forces. During the Battle of Poland, this had already paid dividends, and some vital experience was gained to allow the Luftwaffe and army to work closer together by leaning out command structures, establishing communication links, and using liaison officers between the Luftwaffe and the army. Nothing shows this better, especially in the Battle of France, than Generalmajor Wolfram von Richthofen's 8th Fliegerkorps, which would provide one part of the support of Luftwaffe 2 at Sedan. And the final, ultimately critical thing that the Luftwaffe brought was Flak. Yes, Flugabwehrkanonen or anti-air artillery. The Luftwaffe had attached AA defenses to the Panzergruppe von Kleist with the express order to provide close-in protection for the panzers. Specifically, the 1st and 2nd Flak Corps deployed motorized flak regiments including the 101st, 102nd, 104th and 202nd. And as we will see, this would pay off massively and was also one of the main differences to how Germany and the Allies had configured their fast maneuvering forces. And the value of flaks is so good you can even see it in War Thunder, today's sponsor, where you can jump into aircraft to rule the skies and pound that ground to your heart's content. Except when the enemy has those sneaky little flak trucks, those wicked, tricksy, they're always up to no good, shooting at beautiful planes. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle game out there, and it is free on PC, consoles and mobile devices. The game offers different play modes from arcade to simulator, and I always recommend realistic battles. Why? Well, it's obvious. With over 2,500 vehicles in the game, I get to upgrade my life experience by jumping in a plane or helicopter, and then I have all those beautiful targets like tanks and ships from over 10 nations in front of me. That's how I get to teach lessons in air superiority. And I even get to destroy all those impressively modeled targets down to their individual components. And just so you know, Until now, over 70 million players have played War Thunder, so that's one target-rich environment. Except that some of them of course do drive around in flak, and suddenly life isn't that easy anymore. What's even better, however, is you can customize your aircraft in the most impressive manner. If you want to fly around in an accurately modeled historical camo scheme, War Thunder and the community skins have got you covered. Or if you want to recreate the flying circus and make the enemy scream in fear when, oh, I don't know, a pink Stuka comes flying their way, hey, War Thunder is your oyster, as they say. New and returning players can get a massive bonus pack with multiple premium vehicles, boosters, and an exclusive decorator, and play for free on PC, Xbox, PlayStation, and mobile. Sign up via the link in the description and the pinned comment. With the Germans arriving around Sedan on the 12th of May, the French would blow the bridges over the Meuse. Now alerted to the threat, the French plan was to bring up reinforcements, but by the 13th of May, the French suddenly came under Luftwaffe bombardment. On the forward positions, Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers hit the main bunkers at around 9:30 in the morning, while German bombers would hit all identified French troop and artillery positions on the main defensive line. Over the next hours on the 13th of May, the bombardment intensified. By the end of operations at Sedan, Stukas would have flown over 500 sorties, and German bombers close to 4,000 sorties. The result on the French side was chaos, shattered morale, and a lack of cohesion, with various French troops on the forward and main line starting to retreat. The French had only limited fighter support in the area and barely any AA to defend themselves, so at times German fighters even started to strafe French positions. By midday, the German flak guns and tanks started pouring fire into the fortifications on the French side of the river, covering the infantry that's setting over to cross the Meuse. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the 1st Panzer and the 10th Panzer had set infantry across and started to clear the defenses. At the same time, the Luftwaffe Stukas now turned their attention to the French main defense line. By the late afternoon, the German infantry expanded their small bridgeheads and crossings were now happening along the river, while combat engineers started to build pontoon bridges. Unnerved by the constant attention given by the Luftwaffe and the many conflicting reports, the French defenders now actually believed that German panzers had already made a crossing, and various units on the main defense line now started retreating. In fact, at this time, not a single tank had made it across yet. But this reaction, especially among the French artillery, allows the German infantry to move up rapidly, and by the night of the 13th, it takes Chevauges. It is now a race against time. During the night, the French start to prepare for an armored counterattack, while the Germans complete their first bridge around midnight. A second is then completed in the morning hours of the next day. The German panzers start to cross, but the bridgehead is far from secure. It is at this point where a French counterattack could have still halted the German advance. As Coram tells us, open quote, French commanders considered an armored counterattack against the German bridgehead at dawn on 14th of May, well before a single German tank had crossed the Meuse, but caution got in the way. On the 14th of May, the French 21st Mechanized Corps was ordered to attack the weakly held southern flank of the bridgehead. Yet General Hunziker delayed the counterattack until the 15th of May. By then, the 10th Panzer Division had fully crossed the Meuse and was ready. End quote. The British and French were well aware of the danger, but especially the French had a hard time figuring out what exactly was happening. The Germans had sealed off the battlefield from the air, with hundreds of fighter sorties preventing any substantial French reconnaissance, while reports from the frontline units were fragmented, contradictory, or flat out wrong. In short, on that critical morning and day of the 14th of May, the French knew something big was happening, but they didn't have the cohesion or information to push back and prevent the catastrophe we now know will happen in the next few days. Except, well, there was one glimmer of hope for the French, and that was a massed air attack against the pontoon bridges and the tightly clustered German armoured spearhead. And that is exactly what the French and British tried to do. On the British side, RAF ferry battles based in northern France and Belgium took off to bomb the bridges. They were supported by a modest number of bombers from RAF Bomber Command. The French meanwhile set out a force of bombers by themselves. These units were under strength and, like the British, lacked the required number of escorts. The best chance was an attack by ferry battles around 3 o'clock in the afternoon of the 14th, with 45 battles attacking, supported by about 15 Blenheims. While some got close to the pontoons and some managed to even put their bombs close to the crossings, no lasting damage was inflicted. There was a short delay in the German schedule following this attack, but that was little comfort. Only about 12 battles returned from the force. The losses to the British Advanced Air Striking Force on the continent could be replaced in terms of aircraft, but not for the crews. Incidentally, it was this action that showed not just the importance of the Luftwaffe covering the decisive operations of the army with many fighters in the air, but also having those motorized AA units accompanying the armored spearhead. Having set up AA defenses around the area, the pontoons were protected by fast-firing guns that had an easy time on the slow and low battles coming in. Thus, by the end of the 14th, the German attack at Sedan had been a quick victory, and now the panzers could be unleashed. Next to securing the area and shielding off the bridgehead to the south, the Germans turned to the northeast. Additional crossings at Dinant allowed more German panzers to cross, and now the race to the channel had begun. Initial counterattacks against the German advance after the 14th of May did not achieve success. Some of these fights were incredibly intense. For example, just south of Sedan, the village of Ston changed hands more than a dozen times over the next few days. By the 16th of May, German troops had reached Montcornet. On the 18th, they reached Cambrai, while Heeresgruppe B was now moving towards Lille after making their own crossing at Dinant, and the panzers had reached the channel on the 20th near Abbeville. During this time, the Luftwaffe started to occupy captured airfields, ferried in supplies, flies close and long-range reconnaissance to understand the French troop positions, and it sends out bombers against infrastructure to prevent the amassing of forces for a counterattack. However, 3 major counterattacks did have a serious chance of upsetting the German advance. The first was the counterattack of General Charles de Gaulle 4th Armored Division. On the 17th of May, de Gaulle punched right into the flank of 10th Panzers and does remarkably well, even reaching Montcornet, a vital strategic crossing for the Germans. But once there, de Gaulle doesn't have the forces to hold out. He's only commanding limited infantry and, uncharacteristically for the French, he has barely any artillery. So, de Gaulle is forced back when the German tanks and infantry counterattack. The lack of air cover on the French side also means that de Gaulle is now at the receiving end of Luftwaffe air attacks. De Gaulle tries again 2 days later at Crécy-sur-Serre, but after initial success the attack meets the same result. The second French counterattack is one that I did not know much about until recently. On the 19th of May 1940, the French launched another one on the crossroads at Berlaymont. I didn't know about this because I was mainly looking at the Royal Air Force and the French Air Force, but I was looking at the wrong air service. So what happened? This attack was conducted by the French Navy, which flew Loire-Nieuport dive bombers. This aircraft was an underpowered dive bomber, able to carry up to a single 225 bomb in the center line, and up to 10 to 15 kilogram bomblets on the wings. This was roughly on par with the German Stuka, though the French aircraft also had a single 20mm in the nose, next to its 2 machine guns, that is, for forward firepower. Now the French dive bombers had previously attacked German forces in the Low Countries, but had not yet been exposed to one critical capability that the German armored columns had, and that was motorized Luftwaffe flak regiments traveling with the panzers. As such, on the 19th, the French dive bombers didn't come in from high altitude, which would have improved accuracy and make it more difficult for AA gunners to track their target. Instead, they came in at about 600 meters. Meanwhile, the Germans had set up 20 and 37mm guns around the vital crossing that was being attacked. Air observers had previously warned about the incoming strike package from the French. And the result for the French was that of the 20 aircraft that were sent against this busy crossing, that was teeming with German soldiers and equipment, only 7 would return, and 6 of these were so badly damaged that they were completely out of the fight. On the German side, however, the losses were light and the crossing was still in use. The final large counterattack on the Allied side was then the British counterattack at Arras. Attacking on the 21st of May, just as the Germans had reached the channel, the timing was good. German supply lines were seriously overstretched and the panzers had already taken significant losses. Here the slow but heavily armed Matilda tanks hit the German advance and it looked like nothing could stop them. The majority of German tanks and anti-tank guns could not hurt the Matilda, but then Flak Regiment 202 stepped in with their 88mm heavy anti-aircraft guns. Now the idea of using the 88 for direct fire on tanks is typically attributed to Rommel. Here again, this is nothing but a myth. If Rommel was the first one to think about it, how come that the 88mm crews already had armor-piercing shells in their trailers? Of course, the reality is that the Luftwaffe had already considered the use of the 88 in ground combat against fortifications and armor targets before the war, and they had successfully done so long before the British counterattack at Arras. And at their fighting at Arras, the Flak Regiment uses its own initiative. This, as well as artillery and later Luftwaffe air attacks, manages to contain the British advance. Now, I had previously said that flak was important, and I hope that some of these past examples that I've talked about here show that. One of the main operational differences of the Luftwaffe to the Allied air forces was that at this time it often massed fighters over decisive thrusts in order to shield the German army from air attack. The French and the British did so at a far lesser extent. But the second main difference between these two sides was the availability of frontline air defenses that kept up with the advance. At Sedan, this helped destroy the fortifications and protect the bridges. At Berlaymont, it had completely shattered the French naval squadrons, and at Arras, the 88s had been brought up to punch holes through the Matildas and avert a very serious threat to the Germans. This video has showed how the Luftwaffe and German army worked together to break through at Sedan and reach the Channel, splitting the Allied forces. The outcome of this operation is not due to some kind of undefeatable mythical German warfare strategy or the German panzers alone, but it demonstrates the importance of combined arms warfare, of mixing the effects and synergies of different units and formations, of maintaining cohesions and coordinating and concentrating forces. And the Luftwaffe's contribution to this operation at Sedan and during the race to the Channel is noteworthy in isolation, of course, as it concentrated its own forces in a manner completely at odds with the British and the French, who strung out the effects of air power across a larger front, at which point they just fizzled out. But it's that coordinated element between air and land, that building up of reconnaissance information, of striking the vital links and targets, of communicating with the army on recon data, intent and capacities, as well as having the logistic capacity to fuel the advance. It is all this that maintains the momentum between the branches as they go from pre-planned to dynamic targeting. And ultimately, that swings the pendulum in favor of the Germans at Sedan and the race to the Channel. After all that air-ground interfacing, check out War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox and on mobile. Never mind if you are a new or returning player who hasn't played in 6 months, use my links in the pinned comment or video description to sign up and get your bonus starter pack. You'll be off to a flying start. And make sure you teach some lessons to targets along the way. Join me next time on The Luftwaffe at War as we dive deeper into the Luftwaffe's operations, aircraft and thinking during World War II. The show is written and produced by me, Christoph Bergs, and if you want to get a hold of future episodes early, vote on topics and get priority access to Q&As, become a supporter of The Luftwaffe at War at patreon.com/milAvHistory or via YouTube memberships on Military Aviation History. A big thank you goes to all the supporters for making this possible. As always, thank you for joining me today and have a great day and see you in the sky.